I hope we inspire all of those incredible people out there to, at the very least, have biology as a layer of their thinking. And when they go out and design things in the world, think about biology and try to incorporate that into what they're doing.
Hey, Karl, what's going on?
Oh, Erum, there's all sorts of stuff going on that I think should be interesting to the Grow Everything audience.
Yeah, like what?
Well, so last night, we're recording this beginning of December of 2024. Google revealed that they had developed a quantum chip that is able to perform tasks in 5 minutes that would take a regular computer something like 10 septillion years. I don't even know how much that is. But of course, that kind of thing just boggles my mind. Two reasons. One is we don't really have great digital models of biology. And we have been working with one really interesting AI drug discovery company. And so reading this news really makes me wonder, how does this accelerate drug discovery? That's one thing that's on my mind.
Yeah, that's incredible. I've been thinking about quantum computing for a while. In my previous life, 15 years ago, I was working with a startup that was creating carbon nanomaterials. And we were thinking of different applications. And one application for carbon nanomaterials is to create microchips for quantum computers. It's a 3D structure. There's this whole concept of qubits. I'm not going to go into it because I need to brush up on my quantum computing knowledge. But it's been a long time coming and interesting to learn how they've developed and accelerated meaning Google, has accelerated their path towards quantum computing. I know that there are call for applications or call for papers or innovations from the Novo Foundation. That's the largest foundation on the planet. They've funded Novo Nordisk and many, many other biopharma companies. And it's something that's been talked a lot about in the astrophysics world. Our friends Michio Kaku, Neil deGrasse Tyson, even though they're not our friends, but yet. But they talked about it a lot. And they talked about it in respect to a lot of quantum effects that happen on the nanoscale, specifically photosynthesis. So as we think about biology, how can we leverage quantum computing to understand how we can convert light into energy? And that gets really, really, really interesting. So I'm glad Google's at it. I'm curious who they'll be working with for like end applications to test it out. I mean, it's something that I was speaking with a few biopharma executives the other day. We had a lunch and they were thinking of, if there's quantum computing, then what happens to passwords? If it can break all passwords. But then we're like, okay, well, if you try 3 times and you fail, then that's the fail safe because you have to keep trying to break a password. But it's going to be a brave new world. My response to the password thing was, okay, maybe not text passwords, but biometrics.
Yeah.
I'm really thinking of our DNA, our data. But then, of course, you can always steal someone's DNA just by taking their used napkin from a trash can or something like that. But I digress.
I'll just make one other comment before we move on to like the next news story. One of the things that the article that I read about the Google breakthrough is that apparently one of the biggest challenges in quantum computing is errors. And there's a lot of errors that happen in quantum computing because, as you mentioned, qubits are used by the computer. And that means that a unit can exist in multiple states at the same time. Mm-hmm. And one of the breakthroughs that Google has, this was published in Nature, by the way, they said that they've been able to reduce errors by introducing more qubits into the system, and they're able to correct them in real time. So it's a really interesting development. I don't claim to know anything about quantum computing except for being amazed by the exponential march of technology.
Also, you mentioned the qubits, and thanks for saying that 2 states at one time, because that's the whole Schrodinger theory of parallel universes. I mean, that's not what he says, but our friends Michio Kaku talk about parallel universes, that multiple states existing at the same time. And it's like, how is it decided which state is actually real? And that's the power of observation, which is really interesting. But anyway, I can nerd out about this. I do need to read up on it because there was just a time in my life where I went deep into it, but I have come out of that hole and haven't been down that hole for a while. But now I'm excited. I want to get back into it. But this isn't a podcast about quantum computing right now. So far, we'll probably get there maybe next year. But Karl, what else is going on in the world of biology and biotech?
So I wanted to mention and congratulate Christina Smolke and her team at Antheia. Christina, you may remember, was on our podcast just a couple of months ago, and her company Antheia is focused on domestic biomanufacturing of pharmaceutical ingredients. They landed $12 million from the Biopharmaceutical Manufacturing Preparedness Consortium, which is looking to really secure supply chains, domesticate pharmaceutical ingredient production. And I think that this is really pretty important. We saw this start to happen during the first Trump administration. There was a lot of talk about onshoring drug production because a lot of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the so-called APIs, are produced in China. And there was always a shortage of drugs. I think that I had worked on with a company called Civica RX that was trying to solve that problem for hospitals, and continues to be a problem because you're depending on drugs that are essential that are coming from the other side of the world. So I think anything that we can do to domesticate biomanufacturing, drug manufacturing is going to be a net positive for the United States, and I think hopefully for the world.
Yeah, that is very exciting. It'd be great to see more consortiums like this to help our early stage biotech companies in the bioindustrials world start leveraging their technology and getting out into the market at a reasonable scale. I think scale is a loaded word, especially as you think about impact products have on the environment, but it's hard to avoid when you also think about the amount of people that are on the planet that need certain products, especially when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So that's great. I'm very excited for Antheia and the team over there. Cool. Great news. What else is going on?
I've got a bunch of news items. So one that caught my eye was this company, Craig Biocraft, that has genetically modified silkworms. And these silkworms are producing what they call dragon silk, which is an ultra strong spider silk. And what caught my eye about this story is we know that there's a number of companies that are out there producing spider silk, AmSilk, Bolt Thread, Spiber. Each one of them is producing it for different applications. AmSilk for more medical applications. Bolt Threads is producing it right now mostly for cosmetics. Spiber has been producing it to produce fabrics. And I think Craig Biocraft is focused on using it also to produce materials, but they're able to do it for less than $300 a kilo, which is still a tenth of what it costs when you're using fermentation, which is amazing. I mean, we tend to think of fermentation as being something that's going to be cheaper, but in this case, actually using the silkworms, modifying them, is able to produce the silk for still expensive, but much cheaper than doing it via fermentation. I know that precision fermentation costs continue to drop, and it's going to just be a matter of time. And we should try to get someone from Bolt or Spiber on here to talk about this, or maybe even someone from Craig Biocraft, because to me, it's amazing to be able to modify genetically a silkworm and use them as the factory, just like our friends at Cocoon Biosciences have done using moth larvae as bioreactors. You don't need a lot of the moths to produce these really important molecules, and you can use these living organisms to produce them for you.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. I think when we think about living organisms on a multicellular scale, it gets a little bit ethical. I know it, but I like that. It depends on how you're treating the moths and the silkworms. I mean, that is how it's made today. I'm just curious how much the traditional way of making silk using silkworms costs. So this new recombinant spider silk costs less than $300 a kilo. Do you know the traditional cost?
I do not, but this silk is supposed to be a lot stronger. So it does have some performance characteristics that normal silk does not. And we'll put the link in the show notes. But when you look at the picture in the facility, what it looks like is they've got these big racks along these walls. I'm imagining that the silkworms are living on those racks. I know when I've seen it in the traditional production of silk, the silkworms are kept on these trays where they're feeding them. I'm sure they have to, you talked about the ethical care of these organisms. I'm sure they have to be very ethical in the way they care for them, because otherwise they're not going to produce. And so you've got to be nice to those little silkworms. But it fits in with, we've said it before, that biomaterials and biomanufacturing was one of our themes for 2024. And biomaterials has been a continuous theme here on Grow Everything. And so I felt like this story really fits into that theme of biomanufacturing. I think we should try to get these guys on. It's a really interesting story.
Yeah, and what a great name for a company. I feel like it should be the name of an actor in a bioprospecting anime show, Craig Biocraft. Hello.
Yeah, totally. There's one other news item that I just wanted to mention before we get into the interview. And this came out this morning. I guess Chinese scientists have come up with this cotton and squid bone sponge that can soak up 99% of microplastics. And this is important because microplastics are ubiquitous or everywhere, and water is going to increasingly be an issue in this century. And so being able to filter water in a way where you can get the microplastics out relatively easily is something that's going to be essential. And I thought that this combination of cotton and squid bone was really interesting because it reminded me of our friends at Tandem Repeat who have been making some great progress with their squid beak proteins and putting those into materials.
To also clarify for those that might be new to our podcast, they're not actually using squid beak. They're looking at the genomes of squid and then taking that information and recreating the protein in the lab. So they're not actually using squid. No squids were harmed in the production of Tandem Repeat's products, but just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah. Thanks, Erum. I mean, these are some interesting news items. Try to keep our listeners informed on what's going on. And as we get into our interview, I'm thrilled to say that this is someone that we've known for a long time, and we're very excited to have him on here. But let's talk about the theme in general. If you're looking at us, if you happen to see one of our videos, you will see that Erum and I have for many months had the Northern Lights as our background. Northern Lights are a natural phenomena, and we're going to be talking about bioluminescence, which is a different kind of glowing phenomenon. Erum, where do you stand on bioluminescence?
I stand strong. I vote yes. I approve this message. I mean, it's incredible. What a beautiful experience. I think my first interaction with bioluminescence were with fireflies, and I would capture fireflies as a youth just in my neighborhood. I grew up in a suburb where I wouldn't wear shoes. We would run around, grab fireflies, put them in little jars or little cups. And it was great. I do have this one story where I had filled up a cup with fireflies. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have like a whole farm. I have this huge family of fireflies. And then my annoying neighbor friend, this little boy, came over and stomped on the cup. It was on the street, and stomped on the cup and then just put his foot down and smeared it across the street. And then there was this glowing smear of goo across the street, and I was so upset. But I wasn't a fighting person. I'm still not a fighting person. I was just mad, and I just walked away.
Wow.
But anyway, it's amazing. And there's a lot that could be done with bioluminescence. There are things being done. Bioluminescence is used in GFP, which stands for green fluorescent protein, and it allows proteins to exhibit a green fluorescence when exposed to light in the blue to ultraviolet range. But it's used to so detect what kind of proteins exist in what you're looking at. But that's used for biology research. And green fluorescent protein was discovered in jellyfish that glow as well. But with jellyfish, fireflies, mushrooms, there's also different types of bacteria and algae that exhibit bioluminescence. And our friend Andy Bass has created a way to celebrate bioluminescence and bring it to the masses.
Before we get into the interview with Andy, I think it's also worth just mentioning that Light Bio's Firefly Petunia, which is a bioluminescent plant that emits a soft green glow in the darkness, was one of Time Magazine's best inventions of 2024. It was actually on the cover of the magazine. Basically, the magazine cover showed a robot holding up a tray of these glowing plants. And people have been working on these plants for a while, so it was really amazing to see that show up. And we actually have seen these plants in real life. But Andy's been working on another way of having more people experience what bioluminescence is. He's done this through a couple of toys that he initially had developed, which we'll talk about. So with that, I think let's have Andy take it away. All right, Andy Bass, we're so thrilled to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
Hey guys, how's it glowing?
It's
Things are going pretty well. We wanted to kick it off by talking a little bit about this collaboration you've got going on. For people who don't know, you've got a collaboration with Herbs, and you sent us each a mushroom tank that includes some bioluminescent dinoflagellants. I think probably most people don't know what that is, so you can explain it. But thank you for sending those our way. I shake it every night, and I get to see these glowing little creatures. Tell us, how did you get started with that, and what has been the response from people who have them in their homes? I know my opinion, Erum's opinion, is going to be biased. Erum, Autumn loves it, right?
Yeah, we're big fans. It's part of our family now.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly the kind of connection we wanted to spark, is being able to take this magical occurrence that happens in the ocean and port that into people's homes where they can enjoy bioluminescence night after night. I've been growing this type of plankton now for going on 12 years. And the inflection point for me was, my background is biology, but my creative genes started expressing themselves sometime after college. And I've always moonlighted with like more of an artistic project, no matter what I was doing. I was making DNA art at the time. So back when gene sequencing and microarrays were a thing, I was selling that technology to pharma. And I was trying to explain that to a layperson on an airplane of like, hey, what do you do? I would get all excited about DNA and put people to sleep like that. So me and my partner at the time were like, everyone has DNA. They should be excited about it. And so we started making these DNA portraits, or DNA selfies.
Oh, wow.
It's basically what the FBI used to use to genetically identify someone, but this uniquely represents a person. And so we started making these portraits, and there was a market for that. And we ended up building a little lab and got invited into the Smithsonian's first ever human genome project. And that was an amazing point in time where a CEO of a biotech company who was doing genetic engineering saw this and said, Andy, your DNA artwork is cool, but what does living art look like? And that question really changed my life. And I couldn't walk around in nature without seeing that's a really cool pigment, and just imagining how can we use nature in our consumer lives. And I saw bioluminescence in the ocean for the first time in 2011 and was like, can I make a living light out of that? I figured it out. No one had grown more than, 100 liters, I think, at the time. Then I was going to those experts and saying, hey, I want to make a light. How do I do it? Really cracked the code on that and made my light, but it's so intricate, no one would put this in their homes. You have to keep the algae at a certain temperature, give them sunlight 12 hours a day to grow. But along that path, people were asking, wow, this is really interesting. What does it eat? How does it grow? And we thought, well, it eats sunshine. It photosynthesizes like plants, and it grows by cell division. And we realized, wow, this is a gateway into the world of biology for inquisitive minds. We actually launched a Kickstarter project. We raised almost a couple $100,000. And the first product we made was this Dino Pet here. So you say dinoflagellates enough, and you just nickname it dinos for short. So the Dino Pet was born, and it turned out to be a huge hit. We sold millions of dollars worth of this cool little clear toy. Ended up selling that business to the guy that asked me, hey, Andy, what does living art look like? He saw we were able to take this idea from 0 to 60. And he's like, I want you to come and work for me and work on some of these other projects I have in mind. So in a nutshell, that's the backstory there.
Wow.
Where was the first place that you saw the dinoflagellates?
It was actually right down the street from me in the Pacific Ocean in Carlsbad.
Wow.
I'd grown up in Alabama, and we had lightning bugs in the summertime. And so that was my first exposure to bioluminescence. But seeing it in the ocean and seeing a blue wavelength of light from the ocean versus that sort of yellow-green wavelength of light on land, there was just this transformative moment for me.
Wow. You're completely right with the dinoflagellates and the mushroom, which is now, but the Dino Pet, sparking imagination, sparking questions. Like my son, he's very young, but he's like, what is that? Are they tiny animals? And the inquisitive minds, I mean, that's a child. That is a child. So I love it. The fact that he's really getting into it. My husband started asking questions. He's like, but it's broken because it doesn't light up during the daytime. I'm like, it's because it's not supposed to, And so it's interesting to have those conversations and being able to materialize your creativity into a product, I'm sure is so satisfying.
Yeah, you really hit on something that we struggled with when we were trying to launch the Dino Pet because it doesn't light up during the day. And with all the technology today and LEDs, people want instant gratification. And we're like, no, this is nature. It's not on your schedule. You're on its schedule. And that was fascinating as I went in to design other products and experiences for like, how do you get the consumer to accept that and step away from the digital world, and come back into nature and be on that time scale? So yeah, that definitely directed a lot of the thinking and the design work I did on other projects and even the immersive experience we have with Glowing Oceans.
Yes, I would love to learn more about Glowing Oceans and curious how your journey went from working with herbs and mushroom. Is it part of Glowing Oceans or is it a new entity just in terms of understanding that? But also this immersive experience, Karl and I got to experience a Glowing Oceans exhibit, or it was an immersive experience when we were at Synbio Beta earlier this year. And wow, I was like, okay, this is going to be transformative for a lot of people because of the spark of imagination and being able to see it. But we'll love to learn about how Glowing Oceans came about and what are some activities you have in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. When we sold the business that we invented with the Dino Pet, it stuck around for about a year. And then the new owner decided not to pursue it anymore. And so there was this kind of hole in my heart. During the pandemic, the ocean in Southern California was just going wild with bioluminescence. And it reignited that desire in me. And I'm like, okay, I need to make a product again, or I need to have bioluminescence like this in my life. And then I designed the mushroom, which you guys have. We're renaming to Lumi, and I can explain that from a psychological standpoint of a child in a little bit. But I'm like, okay, I don't want to do the exact same thing I did before, but it's there. It's something I can share with people, share this amazing experience. But along the way in this journey, two people reached out to me, which really transformed my thinking here. One was James Cameron and his team at National Geographic. They're working on a series called The Science of Avatar. And if life on Pandora were real, how does the science work? And there's a whole episode on bioluminescence. We grew the plankton for them. I joined them on the episode and really dive into this magical world in the ocean that most people never get to experience. So that was one opportunity that came my way. And a second opportunity was a producer, director out of LA who was working on a project for Lexus. And he had swam in bioluminescence as a child off the coast of Africa. He had this vision to bring this into the commercial for Lexus. And he's like, hey, can you grow a few thousand liters for me, ship it up to Vancouver, and let's do this. And so I was the Dino Wrangler on that project too. We grew it, we shipped it. Lots of logistics involved with a precious liquid living organism where you're controlling the temperature, you're controlling the lighting, it has to ship fast. But it was those two experiences where I got to see the cast and crew walking around in bioluminescence and just the awe factor there, taking their breath away with how amazing this blue organic light is from the plankton. And it was the aha moment where I'm like, okay, I want to create an experience where people can walk through this and really shift their mindset. When you typically go to an aquarium, you see the big things like the whales and the sharks, but the microcosms of our world are so important. And these tiny little single-celled plankton, they produce more than 50% of the oxygen we breathe. They sequester massive amounts of carbon dioxide. So it's like, let's turn the spotlight to these things and do it in an immersive way. And then the products like the mushroom, the Dino Pet, that's like exit to the gift shop and take that experience home with you, or share that experience that you had. We're opening this in San Diego. Share this experience with a loved one who's in the Midwest that doesn't have the ocean next to them. So that's how the thinking and the idea came about for Glowing Oceans.
So when we saw the exhibit you had up in San Jose earlier this year, you basically had put your phytoplankton into a very shallow pool that people could either walk through or touch with their hands. What's it going to look like when you open up this experience in San Diego in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, we'll have some different aspects. So it's really all focused around the plankton. There is going to be this edutainment section where, again, we want to draw people in with this exciting blue light. and then secretly teach them things about the ocean that they might otherwise not ask questions about. But we're going to have some of the tile-like experiences where each footstep or touch ripples this blue light. We're going to have we didn't get to set this up in San Jose, but this overlook where it's raining bioluminescence on you. So you're looking up and it's almost looking at stars crashing onto this viewport. And then we'll have a giant lagoon that people can walk around in. It's shallow, but it gives you that experience where your footsteps are causing this shimmering of light. So it's almost like you're connected to nature because it requires your energy to walk through this and see the glow. And we're going to do this lagoon in such a fashion where there's mirrors all the way around. So it has this infinity-like effect when you're walking through it. And one of the things that surprised me from the exhibit you guys attended was I was asking for feedback after, and somebody told me talking to strangers in the dark was something that was actually quite fascinating. And you have this shared experience. You're looking at something you've likely never seen before, and you're talking about it. It's not so dark that you necessarily can't see someone right in front of you, but you're not paying attention to what does that person look like or whatever. It's more like, hey, we're sharing this experience, we're talking about it, and we're getting connected on a different level. So that was like one surprising thing that came out of the exhibit that I want to foster more of, because I think it's a cool community thing to bring together.
Yeah. What a great added advantage. We're in the post-COVID era. People are thirsty for immersive experiences. Karl and I are lucky to live in New York City, and there's a lot of unique experiences, but they get sold out. Like, people want to get out of their house, they want to get away from their screens, and they want to learn more about the real world. I feel like it's interesting dichotomy between technology and nature, because in our world, a lot of people are just in front of their screens, they're doing work, so they just really want to get out and do something meaningful in their lives, something beautiful.
Yeah. So I have a co-founder with Glowing Oceans. His name is Jeffrey Fullerton, and he was an early employee at Meow Wolf. Have you guys heard of Meow Wolf and that immersive experience? I'll tell you a little more about it in a second, but to stay on topic, and one of the things Jeffrey noticed is that youth rebel when culture hits this point of being perfectly polished and no longer has room for expression. And I think that's the point in time we're at, where a lot of the immersive experiences that are around now, they're digital. We're in front of our computer all day long. We're on our phones all day long. And then we go to this immersive experience and it's just more LEDs and projections. We want to kind of turn that on its head and bring you back into nature. And a term Ginger from Biomanufacturing taught me was forest bathing. And I know you guys have partaken in some of those journeys. And I was like, well, isn't it just a hike through the woods? And then I started reading about it a little bit more, and the psychology that came about in Japan from the urbanization there, and how important it was for just mental health to get out and walk around in nature. And the study that was done in Silicon Valley, where had two different studies where some people would walk through an urban environment and getting outdoors and getting fresh air, and the others would walk through a forest, and just the differences of emotions and mental health that came from that. So I think that's another undercurrent of what we're doing is I really hope to inspire people with this, if we want to call it ocean bathing experience, and connecting back into the ocean in a way that you might never otherwise do. So that was a profound thing for me as I started learning more about it and thinking through this.
Yeah, the forest bathing. I love that you looked at the Japanese culture, because they specifically were talking about techno stress. They identified that there is stressful experiences if you're in front of technology too much or you're too engaged in technology. And being in the forest too was what we learned is that, yes, it's like, okay, you're not in front of a computer, you're in this vast space, but there's actual molecules and microbes that you're breathing in that generates a physical response or helps regulate your immune system and reduce your cortisol levels. So there's a very deep science behind it. And I'm so curious how that translates being in different parts of the ocean. Obviously, the salt, and there's probably a lot of studies on the minerals and how that helps your skin and the movements and everything. But I'm sure there's parallels there. And now I would love to go down this rabbit hole, maybe in another episode.
Yeah, I'm really interested in it too. And I think it's something we should study. And you guys know Paul Stamets was also at the event in San Jose. And I never thought I would blow Paul's mind. But when he put his hand into the bioluminescent culture, he was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And talking about some of the work that he and his partner do, We did discuss how, for me, I've noticed it, I haven't studied it, but something about the blue light is just really calming. And I'm interested to go deeper on that.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Yeah, I was just going to comment for our listeners who don't know what Meow Wolf is. My wife was the first person to talk about this. She saw it in Santa Fe, which is where their headquarters. And they're these deeply immersive experiences. I think the Santa Fe experience maybe was done in a strip mall or an abandoned mall. They have since nationalized. I can't remember where I was, maybe in Burbank at the airport. They had like flyers for the Meow Wolf experience in Los Angeles. But these deeply immersive, we could even say psychedelic experiences that they've put together. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how your experiences around the ocean end up being translated, especially when your co-founders comes from that space.
Yeah. And just to add on to Meow Wolf a little bit and the Santa Fe space, they actually bought a bowling alley.
Oh,
And
wow.
the first instance you see, it's this pedestrian house. You go inside, you open the door. It looks like somebody lives there, but then you start noticing things are off. Maybe the crown molding is slanted. And you open the refrigerator and it's like a portal into another world. And you go in it and you slide down. And then that's the other world that opens up. So it's really cool. And
Wow.
yeah. So we may not go to that level of build out initially, but I want to take it there. They've had, I think, about $500 million of investment and have now 5 or 6 locations. I don't have that much money right now, so we'll walk before we run as we build this out.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
awesome. So, Andy, you and I have known each other for a fair amount of time. We kept showing up at the same events over and over again, which is, I think, a testament to our longevity. But across your career, you've worked at different companies. You mentioned that you were selling DNA stuff, but you've worked with startups and very established companies. And how has that experience influenced you in terms of being an entrepreneur and a CEO?
Yeah. For me, for better or worse, I like to do things that nobody's ever done before. I think it's just more compelling, more interesting, and the types of conversations you can have are just so much broader. So I've really taken these lessons in the abstract. All of this is very relevant and future facing. So how do we bring this into the consumer market and tell that story in an interesting way? And from the example from DNA, but also work I did at Ecovative, where they're growing the mycelium of mushrooms. When I got there in 2019, packaging was a big focus, and they had just licensed technology for leather to another company. And we're looking for like, what's the next thing? Where should we focus? And plant-based meats were on the rise, but it was all of the impossible, more ground meats, not looking at whole cuts. And we looked at the structure of mycelium and the way that the fibers grow together. We're like, wow, what about making whole cuts of meat, chicken, steak? And then one of the people on our team who's very data-driven sort of looked at numbers. And he's like, guys, bacon is this amazing opportunity here. There's $6 billion of sales in the US. All the veggie bacon on the market's really terrible. How can we fit into that? So we started looking at ingredient lists from those bacons that were on the market, and there's like 40 different ingredients. And we're like, let's use mycelium as this whole cut, and that's our palette, and let's build upon that. And so we launched My Bacon with only 6 ingredients, including the mycelium. It's actually sold down the street from me in Carlsbad now. So it was really cool to see where we're able to take that and the storytelling that goes along with that. When we did early consumer tests with a group out of San Francisco, Matson and Barb Stuckey and her team, it was fascinating because we put some of our scientific terms out there like mycelium, and the consumer response was, what the hell is mycelium? I don't want to Google the label when I'm at the grocery store. I just want to buy something that looks good and take it home. So it's been an interesting journey for like, how do we communicate all of the cool things happening in life sciences and nature in a way that is compelling for the consumer and something that they want to adopt into their lives?
I'm going to add one part to this story. So I was an early tester. I think I told this story when we interviewed Evan. I got this big box with the like cold packs, and my kids are like, "What the hell is that?" And it had 2 pieces of mycelium bacon in it. And I felt bad for the packaging. And then Evan's like, "Oh yeah, that was really early, Karl. I mean, because I remember it tasted good, but it wasn't great." And I told him that, and now it tastes great. But we've got a supermarket up the street, like I can walk there in 2 minutes. They also have started carrying it, and I bought it. The flavor is incredible. When we had Evan talking about repeat customers and people who've had heart disease, the success of it is well merited. So I love that story.
Oh, yeah. We're in Brooklyn. It's everywhere. Some of the grocery stores in our neighborhood, their refrigerated cases are mostly plant-based, more plant-based than animals. I mean, it's the nature of Brooklyn and it's in all the stores, but a lot of restaurants now use it as well because depending on how you like your bacon, like some people, I don't know who likes it soft and flimsy, but I like it crispy. And then when you bite into it, some of the oil squeezes out. That's my favorite bacon is my bacon because of that. But yeah, great work on your part. I mean, in that capacity, it was a lot of product and marketing on your side, correct?
Yeah, and it's awesome to see it coast to coast now too, and how far it's come along. But yeah, it really started out, we did tastings in upstate New York, and we invited investors, we invited food critics, whoever would come and sit at the table with us. We got a lot of insights. There's a local chef there, Nick Ruschetto, who's part of the My Forest Foods team now, but he was running a restaurant and we're like, "Hey, Nick, what can you make with this?" So we did a lot of different tests from oysters. We made savory stuff, desserts and cracker crisps and things like that. So there was a lot of R&D that went into that. And then we picked up on that information and figured out, okay, what's the product? Where's the market? Who's the market? How do we get it out there? And one of the great things about Evan is he doesn't wait on perfection to happen. As a marketer, I struggled with it too, and we joke about it, but I want it to be perfect and wrapped. And Evan's like, "No, let's push it out. Let's get it out there." So Karl, you tasted one of the early versions, but it led to where the company is at today, which is selling in stores in both California, New York, and places in between.
Yeah, Ecovade is incredible. We have to have Evan back on. I think we're due because Ecovade is doing incredible things. They're one of the leaders in sustainable biomaterials. So I want to get into sustainable biomaterials because I know that is a world that you live in beyond glowing oceans. You are a hot commodity in the biomaterial space. Everybody wants to work with you. I know that for a fact. So I would love to know, being at Ecovative, was that your first time really going into the biomaterials world? Did you bring some of that to Ecovative? And then how is that now in your present work? I know you're working on a few things and I'd love for you to share it with our audience.
Yeah, so prior to Ecovative, and the company that actually bought Biopop was Intrexon. So I was tapped to be the head of the consumer sector in Intrexon. And we were looking around at all things consumer biology and what's interesting, and met Evan during that phase when we were talking about leather-like materials and other ideas. So I brought a wealth of expertise from my time at Intrexon on just different biomaterials, all the way from like silk proteins to other applications in food and flavorings and even medicines. We were working on a technology to deliver active below the skin with new technology, and how can that work in the consumer world of lotions and applications like that. So yeah, very diverse on the way that I looked at biomaterials. And then once I got to Ecovative, food was the first focus, and then we shifted back into the world of textiles and developed a lot of great partnerships and technology there. Now where I'm focused, I have a company called Manana Land, Tomorrow Land, where I do consulting work and some biotech investing. And I spoke with Malik Demirel from Tandem Repeat early on. He shared with me what he's doing with squid proteins and how it's very silk-like. So we stayed in touch. There was an opportunity for me to join him with a project that the Department of Defense is funding. And they're interested in, hey, if climate change disrupts growing cotton or war disrupts supply chain, we still need to clothe our troops. So we want to build a domestic infrastructure for basically textiles and how we can make our clothes for military and for consumer applications. I'm working with Malik on that now and the Tandem team. And one big change that's happened from, I think, when you guys first talked with Malik was rather than have to genetically engineer that squid protein, we've actually found an alternative protein source that's ubiquitous today. You can think of microbes that are brewed from yeast, where in the beer industry or even in the food industry, where we're using yeast to produce enzymes, once those actives are produced, the yeast goes somewhere. The yeast still has protein in it. Typically today, it goes into pet foods or some other application, but we're able to take that waste stream and upcycle it into making fibers. And here's some examples of that today. So it's incredibly soft. It's stronger than cotton and uptakes dye like wool does. And we've been working across a variety of different applications of blending it with traditional materials and seeing how does this fit into the military supply chain and consumer supply chain, and have some big partnerships now with some luxury fashion brands, some military companies, some textile mills where they're actually taking the fibers and making different yarns and then selling that on to the brands that they serve. That's been really fascinating. And surprisingly, having the background from Ecovative and working in the leather-like materials, it's a whole different world once you get into fibers. And I was blown away by, I don't know what I don't know. And it was just a whole other world that I had to teach myself.
That's amazing.
When we had Malik on, he was explaining to us about like different spinning mechanisms to make the yarn. And he also mentioned that the protein self-repairs. So I could imagine that in the military, if hopefully no one gets shot, but if they got shot or there's like a tear, they would either heat it up or I don't know exactly what the mechanism was, but it would repair the hole in the fiber.
Yeah, when you think too about even as consumers, how do we get the most longevity out of the shirts that we have at home? And can that be self-healing? With the technology we're looking at now with taking waste stream proteins and upcycling those, it doesn't have that same functionality as the squid protein, but it's basically rather than having to grow cotton and deal with the pesticides that come along with that and the water and the land usage, we can create this other supply chain for creating fibers that is less extractive in the environment. And then where we hope to use that platform for there is going back into the genetic engineering of like, hey, these other proteins have interesting functionalities. How do we employ those into what we're doing now? So that's another big lesson that I've learned is how do we get to market as fast as possible? And rather than wait on something that may be cost prohibitive today, like genetically engineering something and it doesn't quite fit in the supply chain as it exists, how do we get from A to Z as fast as possible? And that's what we're doing at Tandem with this approach.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's part of Evan's playbook too. It's like, let's just go into the market.
Get it out there as fast as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the MVP? Oh, so fascinating. I just love to hear stories of the people that we know come together and collaborate because there's just so much intelligence and lessons that are learned. And to be able to bring those lessons to a project so that project can move along faster versus any failures or that lesson needing to be learned again and again and again. It's just incredible that we can come together and do that.
Yeah, it's great to see the way that existing industries have opened the doors to the idea of bringing biology in too. And that's a whole other can of worms to be like, wow, how do we use biology in the fashion industry? And so it's great to have those stewards to be able to bring us in, show us the ropes and say, start here and then let's build from there. It's been very supportive with a lot of brands. Fashion for Good has done a great job too of connecting the dots between all of the players in luxury and fashion and consumer applications with these innovators like Ecovative, Tandem, and many others.
Mm-hmm.
That's so great. Yeah. Can we circle back a little bit to Glowing Ocean? Because as this episode goes live, you'll be launching in San Diego. And I think it'd be really interesting to know what has gone into the design of this interactive experience in San Diego. Where is it going to be? How big is it going to be? What can people expect?
Yeah. So speaking of getting going before you have it all figured out, that's what I'm right in the middle of. So we have a few locations identified in Carlsbad and Oceanside. We're negotiating leases with those places now, but don't have firm commitments. So that's a bit up in the air, but I'm like, we just need to go for it. A lot of the hard things are done, which is the IP that we've developed to be able to grow this plankton on such a massive scale. That's literally been probably a decade of my life figuring that out. And how do we do this in a sustainable sort of aquaculture way without growing other organisms that we don't want in there and keeping this basically contamination free? So a lot of that heavy lifting has been done, but then bringing in the design elements from people, again, who have done it before. So Jeff from Meow Wolf has come in on the operational side and been just tremendous in helping put some guardrails around like, okay, here's how we need to think about building the experience, how we need to think about bringing people into this. As an aside, I went to Japan in March of this year. There's a group there called Team Lab, and it's similar to Meow Wolf, but they use a lot of projection mapping, and they actually have a water feature called it's Team Lab Planets. So I'm like, I don't really care about the experience, but what's the logistics behind that? How do they get thousands of people a day to orderly take their shoes off, clean their feet, walk through this experience? And what does that look like? So I learned we're applying a lot of that technology into Glowing Oceans. So just leveraging the industry that is out there, the expertise that already exists, and borrowing that and bringing it in to shape what we're doing at Glowing Oceans.
Wow. Yeah. I love that you're going out there, learning other techniques. Again, lessons are important. So the star of the show are dinoflagellates. Are there other glowing ocean organisms that, you're looking to bring in, whether it's in this exhibit that's going to be launching or in future experiences?
We're still looking at that right now. Of course, you can go to some aquariums at the moment and see there's some flashlight fish, some jellyfish. You can see some instances of bioluminescence there. So we don't really want to repeat what's happening there. No other aquarium in the world shows bioluminescent plankton. We have a partnership with Birch Aquarium at UCSD where we bring dinoflagellates to their Ocean at Nights event. But aside from that, this doesn't exist in the world. And so that's really what we're focused on initially. But if we do something else, I want it to be massive and never done before. And I'm trying to think about, we're talking with some people at Monterey Bay and like, how do we get an anglerfish on display? That's really never been seen. But there's a lot of challenges there, bringing those organisms up from the deep where oxygen's different, the temperature of the water is different, has its own unique challenges.
The pressure,
yeah. It's fascinating. What we're learning is that the oxygenation is probably more important than the pressure, but it's still a lot of work going into that. But for now, it's all about the plankton, and it's all about letting people discover how amazing these microorganisms are that are in the ocean, that if they weren't there, there's really no life on the planet. So we have to take care of them.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that for as big as whales are, that's what they eat. And they're not the only ones.
Totally.
It's not that plankton are at the bottom of the food chain. They are the food chain.
They really are. Yeah. Copepods will eat the plankton, and then a bigger fish will eat the copepod, and on and on. So yeah, they really are the base and the existence of the food chain. You're right.
Yeah. So now we're getting to the portion of the podcast where we're really going to think crazy and maybe what's possible. So bioluminescence is something I've been fascinated about. So I'm just so excited that we get to talk to you of all people about it, and that there's different organisms in the sea. You talked about fireflies, you talked about Paul Stamets. So there's bioluminescent fungi out there. And we also have the world of biotechnology and genetic engineering. When you think about all these things, what do you dream up? How do we harness bioluminescence in a way that, yes, there's honoring the organism that harnesses the power of bioluminescence, but then being able to then perhaps engineer something. There's companies like Light Bio, for example, engineering plants to glow, and that's a whole nother world. But love to go into the brain of Andy Bass and bring out some ideas and imagination for our listeners, because maybe our listeners will start a company in bioluminescence. You never know.
Yeah. When I was asked the question of what does living art look like, I tried to take a step back and say, what does that even mean? And the fundamental question I came up with was, what can biology do that chemistry can't? It can live, it can evolve, it can grow. So how do we think about things we need or things we do with that in mind? With Glowing Oceans, what I hope to do is really inspire the future champions of ocean conservation, inspire the next generations of thinkers, doers, inventors. If life can glow, what else is possible? I don't know if I'm smart enough to come up with those answers and those new technologies. But I hope through what I do know and what we can do with Glowing Oceans that we inspire all of those incredible people out there to, at the very least, have biology as a layer of their thinking. And when they go out and design things in the world, think about biology and try to incorporate that into what they're doing. So I don't have any big, magnificent, grandiose things to share with you on how we're going to change the world, but I want to change the world through edutainment and by bringing the community together and that understanding of biology as a base layer.
Yeah, that's absolutely needed. I mean, we're doing our little tiny part in our little world of podcasting and hope that this is entertaining. I mean, listeners, let us know. I mean, if you're liking it, tell us what you like, don't like. We're very coachable as podcasters. But there's also a lot that's unknown in the ocean too. So with the partners that you work with, you talked about James Cameron. I mean, he's just going down there. I don't know how often he's doing that, but just to see what is down there, because biology manifests in so many different ways. Bioluminescence is one, but what other biological processes are down there? And what is down there? I mean, I think that there were some documents that were released from the White House about aliens being down there. I mean, it's just like, is what? And some people say octopi are aliens. I don't know. But as you think about ocean conservation and sparking imagination, you're doing this with bioluminescence, but what other types of organisms or activities, like you're bringing it to these immersive experiences, but there are some ocean experiences like cruises and stuff. How do you see all of that crescendoing, or maybe just some ideas on that aspect of it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's so much we don't know about the world, and how we think about the visitors to Glowing Oceans are explorers. And we want to inspire them to keep exploring after they leave the exhibition. You guys have seen a version of Glowing Oceans, and I'm so happy that you did. It's been really challenging to go to existing institutions and say, hey, I have this great idea, work with me on it. And that's been challenging. And so what I came to this realization that I just have to build it myself and show them what's possible. So I've taken my money from my last company I sold and I poured it all into this. I'm really hoping that I'm not as well. I know I'm crazy, but I hope everyone else loves the crazy too. So what we hope to do is really inspire what's possible at this flagship location in San Diego. And we do have some potential partners where, if you guys have been to the Bodies exhibit and how that traveled the world and touched about 25 million people, we expect to take Glowing Oceans on the road as a traveling exhibit as well, and plug into existing venues like aquariums, museums, other entertainment centers. So as we think about going to the Midwest where there's no ocean and that's what the dinos grow in, we're evolving the water. We're building seawater profile basically that we can take on the road. There's a lot that we are doing still with Glowing Oceans in this iteration of it, and hope to be able to expand this globally around the world so that anyone that wants to visit can certainly come and experience it beyond just a trip to San Diego.
That's the coolest thing. Absolutely. Yeah.
So Glowing Oceans, we're going to have our audience members encourage them to go and see this. Right now, San Diego plans to expand globally. So that's going to be very exciting. And then can people order the mushroom?
Yeah, so we've just opened ticket sales for Glowing Oceans on the website, glowingoceans.com. We're opening the venue in June 1st, 2025. So we'll do the build out between now and then. But we encourage people, this is going to sell out. It's a limited experience. You can also buy all of our products on glowingoceans.com. So the mushroom, the t-shirts, hats, to really support and help build this out. And we're excited to welcome so many from the biotech community to kids and other visitors that are coming to San Diego. So we're really excited. It's going to be amazing. We just had a launch party and was well received with a lot of media, influencers, press. So you'll start to see a lot more of that hitting the wires and the Instagram feed shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And then we'll certainly be amplifying that. I mean, so audience members, take a look at our show notes. We're going to have all the links there. You follow us on LinkedIn. We'll be promoting everything through there, through Instagram, all of the lovely channels that we're on. What an incredible gift that you're giving to people to be able to really look at bioluminescence and think about biology in a magical way, right? This is incredible. We really appreciate that you came on to share your thinking, your creativity, edutainment. We need more of that in biology. So Andy Bass, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast.
Thank you, Erum. Thank you, Karl.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
I love talking with you guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell the world more about what we're up to at Glowing Oceans and beyond.
Yeah, can't wait to have you on again so that you can give us a post-launch report and let the world know how successful you've been.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Erum, we've known Andy for a while. What did you think of that interview?
Yeah, I'm excited that we finally got to speak with him and have our audience get to listen to the glory that is Andy Bass. We have seen him progress throughout his career, as he talked about in this episode. And it's an amazing career. I mean, if you're working at a large biotech company or not, you're working at a large corporation and you start seeing an opportunity to bring the fascinating technology or science to the masses, try something on the side and maybe it could lead to something bigger. And I just love the fact that Andy, who is from the world of sciences, is creating more experiences for the mainstream and making biology popular. One of the things that we mentioned in the podcast is that we need more celebrity biologists because astrophysics has 7 from Michio Kaku to Neil deGrasse Tyson to Brian Greene, but there also needs to be more female astrophysicists,
Yes.
astrophysics celebrities. But Andy, I think, is positioned to be one. Besides the science communications, as you guys all experienced, he's phenomenal at that. He has a great vibe. He's very warm and welcoming, very friendly. I could just see him on one of those science docuseries where they go around the world talking about unique biological functions in different parts of the world, almost like how Anthony Bourdain was to food and culture. Andy Bass could be to biology and culture.
I think that's a great idea. We could definitely use a show like that. I'm surprised no one's taken that and run with it.
I mean, I would say like David Attenborough has done that on the multicellular large organisms, the diversity of animals on the planet. But on the micro scale, I mean, there might be someone just not coming to my mind.
Yeah.
Maybe Bill and I talked about it.
I don't know, TikTokers who are listening to this, someone's got to take that and run with it because we need more people to understand biology and biotech and this space that we talk about here on Grow Everything. We had talked about Andy and the bioluminescent experience, glowing ocean experience, many episodes ago after we had experienced it in San Jose after the Symbio Beta conference. And so I'm very excited to see this become something that's much more mainstream. What was cool about experiencing glowing ocean in real life is you don't know what to expect. And then when you get down on your hands and knees and you touch the water and you move your hand through the water and these bioluminescent phytoplankton are emitting the light, it's really a pretty profound experience. We've traveled to Mexico and had the opportunity to go to the places where this exists naturally in the ocean. There's sea caves where you can see this, but I've never been up close to it, and it was really the first time I'd ever experienced it. So I think I'm going to add going to the ocean and the places in the world where you can see this natural phenomena to my bucket list.
Oh, yeah. I've been trying to go. When I was in Puerto Rico, there was also an experience in Nova Scotia, but they're always sold out. And the experience is kayaking. And every time you do like a stroke of the row, it's pure glowing water. And yeah, I remember the experience of the glowing ocean exhibit in San Jose. It was so beautiful. I wanted to point out that that whole being in the dark with other people, as Andy mentioned earlier in the interview, that in itself is unique because humans are so visual. We've evolved to be so visual that we've muted our other senses as is not as prominent. But when you shut off your visual capabilities, your other senses become more enhanced. And that could be feeling and smell. We didn't eat anything during the experience, but there are those dining in the dark experiences, which I've never done. But it's wonderful. I think more people need to experience it. And listeners, you can experience the glowing oceans. The tickets are on pre-sale. The actual exhibit will be opening up in June. So if you're someone that likes to travel and you want a reason to go to San Diego, California, this is your reason to go there. We all experience glowing oceans at Symbio Beta, but I had a super sneak peek when I had gone to see Andy. Our friend Ginger knows Andy very, very well. And we wanted to go just see him as he was preparing for it. And when we went to go see him, we ran into Paul Stamets and Martine Rosblath, I think John Cumbers. There was a bunch of people that were there just beforehand. And Andy had mentioned it in the episode that Paul Stamets got to experience it as well. So we were putting our hands in buckets and just seeing it. And that was cool. But to see the actual exhibit unfold with being able to step through it and really the different types of vessels. But when you go to San Diego, I'm looking at the website right now, there's waterfalls of glowing oceans. I can't wait to go. I'm planning a trip right now, like to go to San Diego to experience this next level experience. We got a little sneak peek, but now this is a full blown. So maybe we'll go there and do a live recording or not, just go and experience it, be in the moment.
Sounds great.
So we have the link in the show notes. Check it out. The videos that they made. I mean, Andy Bass is so creative. Him and his team have done an amazing job just enticing everyone to go. This is a great reason to go to San Diego. Among the many reasons, the weather, it's just a great environment being in San Diego, but this is a must-see, must-experience exhibit. So please go on. No. So just go on the website and order your tickets today. We'll have to have Andy back on. I mean, this is just the beginning. He is a proponent of bringing unique biology and the beauty of biology to the mainstream. And I'm sure there'll be a lot more to be experienced in the world of bioluminescence and other biology through the lens of Andy Bass. So we want to thank him for being on the pod and stay tuned for more biology on the Grow Everything podcast.
Yeah, thanks for listening. That's the pod.